Morning, everybody. Yeah. Well, I just want to talk about the God who sees me. We've already been saying so much about that anyway. You know, He's the one that chooses us. He's the one that wants us, and he lifts us up. And we first see this relationship with man in the Garden of Eden. Because God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. This was his habit. And this is how God wanted it to be, this very close relationship. And he was looking one night for them in the garden. He couldn't see them. That's because he wanted to have time with them. He wanted to talk with them. He wanted a relationship with them. In Genesis 15, we hear Abraham talked with God. That was something that he did regularly. And God promised him a son, even in his very old age. Not only did God say he'd have children, but he said that he would have like the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. In Genesis 16, it tells how Sarah's maid had a son through Adam. And she ran away and sat in the desert crying, and she and her son had no food or water. So there she is, out in the middle of whatever desert it was, and she couldn't bear to be close to her son because they were without food and water. And God just came and provided that water for them. And Hagar's response was, "I have now seen the one who sees me." What a statement. When Jacob was running away from his brother Esau, he was spending the night outside. He found a stone and he rested his head on it. And in the night he had a dream of a ladder going up to heaven and angels descending and ascending and descending up and down this ladder. In the morning, he said, "God was here and I never knew it." That's Genesis 28. In Genesis 32, it tells of Jacob's time working for his uncle. And as he leaves to go back to his homeland, he sends out his possessions and animals and family in groups to try and appease the wrath of his brother. And when he's on his own, God meets with him and wrestles with him. And God asked Jacob his name. And God said, "From now on, your name will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And Jacob asked what God's name was, but he never said. But Jacob said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has spared." This was something the Israelites and the Jewish people felt, that if they saw God, that they would die because God couldn't look on them. That there is Jacob who's seen God face to face, and yet his life was spared. In Genesis 39, and then in Genesis 41 and 43, the Bible tells the story of Israel's sons, especially Joseph. It all started of God's plan to save Joseph and his family. And he gave Joseph the dreams and that saying that his brothers would bow down to him, and that which angered them, and he ended up in Egypt. Now, people would think, well, that's really bad. You know, he got accused of things he hadn't done. He was in a really dark place. But God kept blessing him. He was put in prison. And the jailer let Joseph take charge of part of the work there in the jail, looking after the other prisoners. And then Joseph came up one day back into court of Pharaoh, and he was there, and he prophesied the famine. And Pharaoh says, "Well, what can we do about it? We need some great person who can organise things and take it over." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "You can do it." So he's come from being a low slave in the prisons to being next to Pharaoh. And whatever Joseph did, God blessed. In Exodus 2, the Bible speaks of Moses' birth and how he was saved by being put in a basket in the Nile as a baby. Pharaoh's daughter raised him. But then Moses ran away because he ended up killing an Egyptian guard because he got angry because of his fellow Israelites being used as slaves. And he was working as a shepherd, and God spoke to Moses from a burning bush. So Moses is just walking along happily. There's a burning bush over there. I'm sure it's burning, but it's not burning up, it's not deteriorating. I'm going to go see. And he got to the bush, and God said to him, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. And that was Moses' commission, when God commissioned him. He was still frightened. I can't talk, I can't use my tongue, I've never been any good. So God allowed Aaron, Moses' brother, to help him. And then he sent the plagues to bring them out of Egypt. In Judges 6, we meet Gideon. Again, the Israelites were hiding from their enemies. And Gideon was in a wine press, threshing wheat. I mean, I don't know how big wine presses are, but they can't be that big. And he just sat there. An angel comes and greets him. Hello, mighty warrior. What, me? Mighty warrior? Nah, can't be. He couldn't believe it. And then he asked if he could just put a test out with the fleece. Put it out twice. First time, the great wrong way round, forgive me. He asked that the fleece would be wet and the ground dry. And the second time, he asked if a fleece could be dry and the ground wet. And it both happened. And it was just like confirmation for Gideon that he was the one that would lead them and start taking over from the Philistines. And gathered people around him to fight the Philistines. Then in Judges 13, we meet Samson. His birth was miraculous, for he was told by an angel of the Lord. Samson was to be brought up as a Nazarite, a very strict sect. You know, they couldn't drink wine, to let the hair grow, and follow so many rules. And it's it tells of how the exploits that Samson did. Fights with a lion, and a jawbone of an ass. And several times the Philistines tried to arrest him. And yet, when they finally did, they gouged his eyes out. And they brought him up into the arena to make sport of him. And he said to the boy at the side of him, put my hands on the big pillars that support this arena. And he cried to God to give him his strength back, this super strength. And he said, just give me his strength back. And they pushed him down, and he killed more at his death than he did whilst alive. The life of Samuel and his relationship with God is amazing. In 1 Samuel 1-3, Jesus tells of Samuel's birth and how Hannah asked for a child because she didn't have any child. And then later on, when he's at the tabernacle, he's there and he hears God calling. But Samuel's never heard God's voice. So Samuel goes running up to Eli, who's an old man, You called me, I've come, what do you want? 3 times. Then Eli, it clicked. It's God calling you. It says, next time. It says, speak, Lord, for your servant heareth. And this was the start of God's long relationship with Samuel. The life of David is described in 1 Samuel 6 and 1 Samuel 16-21. All that David did and how he honoured God. And the Bible actually says of David, he was a man after God's own heart. He wrote most of the Psalms, which speak of how David was feeling, especially in difficult times. In 2 Kings 6, Elisha and his servant woke up one morning to find that the city had been surrounded by the Arameans. And Elisha said to his servants, don't be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are against us. And he asked God to open up his servant's eyes. And the servant looked round to the hills. And it says, full of horses and chariots of fire were surrounding them. So they got the city, they got their enemies, and then they got God's army around them. And he led them out. Elisha led them out and away from that city. And then God told him to feed them and to send them back to their own towns. In Daniel, we meet his friends, him and his 3 friends. They are taken to Babylon and put into service as the king's advisors. And Daniel worshipped God, even though he was in a foreign land. And at one point, it was illegal to worship anyone but the king. But Daniel and his friends ignored this. And Daniel ended up in the lion's den. Well, it was a pit in those days. So there he is, and they put him in this pit with the lions. What does God do? He shuts the lion's mouth. Any of you that have been through Sunday school and that have probably heard the song, God just shut the lion's mouth so they could not harm him. And the king came down the following morning early. Daniel, are you all right? Come on. He said, yeah, God just shut the mouth. That were it. And then his 3 friends were put in a furnace because they wouldn't worship him at the king. And they pushed him in. There were 3 of them. But the king looked in. 1, 2, 3. There's a 4th. Who? Why? What? But it was God that was there in the fire, and it came out completely unharmed. Didn't even look like they'd been in the fire. Didn't smell like it. Daniel prayed for Israel, and an angel came to speak with him. But it was held up as he fought spiritual battles, and the angel told him what to do. What about the New Testament? We see that Jesus appeared to many people at different times when they were in difficult situations, and then the situation was changed. An angel came to Elizabeth and Zachariah was a priest, and they were an elderly couple who had no child. And the angel told Elizabeth that she'd have a baby boy to call him John. And then the angel went and told Zachariah too. And so, yeah, they did have John the Baptist. And then, I don't know how long a distance it was, but there was Mary. An angel went to her to tell her that she was going to have a baby boy and that she was to name him Jesus. That's in Luke 1:26-38. And the next thing that we hear is that Mary goes to visit Elizabeth. And when they meet and greet each other, the baby in Elizabeth's womb leaps with joy. And Mary responds with the most beautiful song. It's just full of joy, thankfulness, and praise for what God has done. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. For he has looked down with loving care on the humble state of his servant. Just what we were saying earlier. Saying, I'm not worthy. And yet there's God doing it. For behold, from now on, all generations will count me blessed and happy and favoured by God. For he has done great things for me, and holy is his name, to be worshipped in his purity, majesty, and glory. His mercy is upon me. Generation after generation, towards those who stand in great awe of God and fear him. Marvellous. Meanwhile, Joseph's fiancé, Mary's fiancé Joseph, he didn't know what to do. My wife, what's she been doing? She's pregnant. But then, God spoke to Joseph and said that it was all right and it was his doing and that he should marry Mary. And then, of course, after the birth of Jesus, again, Jesus' life was in danger. And Herod was in a rage. And an angel came and told Joseph to go to Egypt so that it would all be safe. Jump forward 33 years later, and Jesus has been crucified and buried in a tomb. That's in John 20. And some women had come to the tomb to prepare his body. Another different Mary had come with them. When they arrived at the tomb, they found the tomb was empty. And Mary looked in and saw some angels who said, "Why are you crying?" Mary replied, "They've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they've taken him." And she turned round, and she saw a man, thinking he was the gardener. She said, "If you've taken him away, tell me where I can go, where he is, and I'll take him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." One word, Mary. And she knew it was Jesus. And she said, "Teacher." And she ran and told the other disciples about it. Paul preached about the resurrection of God Jesus and states that many people have seen Jesus after his resurrection, including 500 people seeing all at the same time. God touched ordinary people. Paul himself, who met Jesus on the Damascus Road, was an ordinary man. And he was trying to kill all the disciples and the followers of Jesus in Acts 9. And there, Paul's going along the road with people who were way around him. And suddenly this bright light comes. And this voice comes. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who am I persecuting, Lord?" And he goes to Damascus. And he gets to know Jesus. Another disciple, Peter, is on the rooftop of a house that is staying in Joppa. He's feeling hungry. And God shows him a vision of animals and insects that Jews would consider unclean. And God says, "Come on, eat." Peter says, "No, I've never eaten anything unclean." God says, "Do not call anything I have made unclean." This happened 3 times. As all this ended, men who had come from Caesarea were knocking on the door, asking for Peter. They had come following an angelic visit to their master, telling him to go to Peter and bring him back to his house. And God spoke to Peter and told him, "It's safe to go with these people. I've called them to come for you." When they got to Caesarea, a man called Cornelius explained all about the angelic vision that he had had that had told him to go and get Peter. So Peter said, "I'm just going to tell you good news." And that whole household was saved. Cornelius had gathered everybody in. "Come on in, come in, come in here," what this man's going to say. Gather it all in. And his whole household was saved. And they were baptized with the Spirit and with water. Because they were baptized with the Spirit. And then, what's going to stop them getting baptized with water? To them, it went the wrong way round. It were water and the Spirit. But well, they're already getting baptized in the Spirit. I've got to baptize me in water now. In Acts 8, we hear about Philip, who was told to go to the south road that goes from Jerusalem to Gaza. And there he met an Ethiopian eunuch on his way home. He was in charge of the treasury at Kandake. And as Philip approached the eunuch who was reading from Isaiah 53, and Philip says, do you understand what you're reading? And the eunuch says, how can I understand unless someone explains it to me? So Philip began from that passage that the eunuch was reading and told him the good news of Jesus. And along the road they came across some water, and the eunuch says, what's stopping me being baptised? So he was baptised. In Acts 12, 1:18, we hear of a time when Peter was imprisoned and the rest of the disciples were praying for him. And suddenly an angel came and woke Peter up. Come on, get up, get dressed. Come on, come on. And he takes him out of the prison gates, out of the prison walls, out into the streets. Then he left him. And when Peter came to himself, he went to the house where the disciples were praying for him. The servant girl could not believe it, and disciples were not sure, but they eventually let him in. There it was, Peter had been in prison, lowest place ever. Earthquake and he's out. The angel comes, rather. What about when Paul and Silas were in prison? They were bound in chains and guarded by soldiers. And, did they ever what we're doing in here? Oh, I don't like it. No, prove rubbish, you don't get any to it. It's all dirty and filthy. No. They said, come on, let's start singing and praying to God. So they did. And suddenly, there was an earthquake, and the prison doors were open. And the prisoners' chains fell off. The jailer was afraid. He thought that everybody had gone, everybody had escaped. He got his sword out and he was going to kill himself. But Paul shouted out that they were all there. So the jailer took Paul and Silas to his house, fed him, and Paul preached, and they were all saved. What about people whose lives that Jesus himself touched? Some friends of a man who was paralysed carried him to a house where Jesus was teaching the people. It was so crowded they couldn't get anywhere near. And they climbed onto the rooftops and made a hole through which they lowered the paralysed man. So they had him breaking the hole, looking down. And Jesus looked up and he saw their faith. And he told the man that he was healed. Then he told him to take up his bed and walk. He was healed. Another time, Luke 8, Jesus is on the way to heal Jairus' daughter, and the crowd were pushing and shoving. And in the midst of all this, a woman who had been bleeding for years, she'd spent all her money on doctors, she'd only got worse. She just reached out and touched Jesus. She was immediately healed. She was frightened when she was first found out because, of course, she was dealt with as unclean. And she was frightened by what had happened. But Jesus just reached out and touched her. What about the man at the pool, Bethesda? A disabled man who was waiting for a miracle to happen. The first person in the water used to get stirred up. The first person in then got healed. But this man had nobody with him. No one to help him, so he could never get into the water quick enough. But Jesus told him to take up his bed and walk. What about today? When have you felt God was with you or was talking with you? When have you felt the healing hand of God on your life? Wayne and I have had several of these experiences. I felt God give me direction when I changed jobs and went back into nursing. I felt his forgiveness on my life. He told me to forgive myself, and that was such a release. When we went to Africa for the first time, God's hand was on us all the time, encouraging us to continue to plan for this and with us when we were there. And one of the main verses that encouraged us was Ephesians 5:17. Therefore, do not be foolish and thoughtless, but understand and firmly grasp what the will of the Lord is good. The will of the Lord is good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So grasp hold of it. Take hold of it. This is for you. If God's giving you a word, that word is for you. Don't let go of it. No. Hold on to the truth of what God is saying to you. It's very strong, is that word. very energetic. And it was not the only occasion that God gave me this verse to hold on to. Wayne had shared before what God has done for him, and I think some of that might come out today. Oh. Why not sit down and quietly reflect on what God has said and done for you? Even think about writing it down so you can read it again to encourage yourself. This will also help you build your relationship with God. Even ask yourself, what did God do for me? How's it making me feel? What happened because of what God did? And you've got it there to look back on and just to feed you and encourage you and to build you up. Amen?
What I'm going to share this morning is what I shared here 20 years ago. I believe it's still relevant today. About 5 different healings. I know there's many healings, but the first healing I'm going to share about is sickness. During this time out in Zimbabwe, we've seen many people who were sick and been healed. We've seen ladies who've been bedridden get up and walk. People who are clinically dead come back to life. And any sickness that you have, God can heal. That's why I'm believing Him for my full eyesight back. I won't be as long as Lillian, don't worry. Sickness. Next one then is the mind, mental health, the mind. I had a breakdown many years ago. I had a medical procedure and it went wrong. And I had a breakdown from it. I was asked to go, I wasn't a Christian then, and I was asked to go as a voluntary patient into a psychiatric hospital, which I did, which I found the staff very cruel. You were confined in a ward with 16 other men for a week. You wasn't allowed to wear your normal day clothes, you had to wear pyjamas. If you had ties in your pyjamas, they took it out so you couldn't harm yourself. Everywhere you went, you were followed. You went to the toilet, you were escorted there and escorted back. Then the second week, they put me into a 4-bedded room, round corner. I was then allowed to use the dining room and lounge. And while I was sat in the lounge, a guy came in, said hello, and then put his head through a window. 2 nurses come in immediately, put him in a straitjacket, then straight into a padded cell. Locked him in there. On the other side of the building, where the resident mental people were, they had a dance on a Thursday night. And I went across one Thursday night, and this lady, she used to get excited at dance band, and she'd fall on the floor and roll around. 2 nurses had come in, take a leg each, and drag her back to her room. That's why I found it cruel in that place. But with mental health, I didn't have depression, I didn't have nothing. I had straightforward breakdown. I didn't know Jesus then. I called out to God for help. Only in 4 weeks, I was out. But I found out the other year from my brother that I'd gone to be assessed to see if I should be locked away indefinite. Because I become frightened of people. If I saw someone in the street I knew, and they said hello, I'd either cower down or turn and run. I got it in my mind one night to run to Scotland. Some friends of mine in Scotland. I determined I would walk it from Haworth to Scotland in one night. I didn't get 2 yards before my uncle stopped us. But getting over that and getting all the rid of the rubbish out of my mind, that's mentality, that's a healing, a mental healing. And the next one is marriage. Marriage is between is when the man leaves his family and the woman leaves her family and they both get married, become man and wife. A marriage, a lot of people think a marriage is a bed of roses, but it's not. It's something that has to be worked at. We found that out because the first 2 years of our marriage life, we didn't live together. We lived apart. I saw you on your days off, on holidays, didn't I? Because she's still trained to be a nurse down in Pendleborough, near Manchester. So I didn't see her that much. But we had to work at it to make it work, haven't we? And we have done over the years. And I know some marriages break down, but I don't know why they break down. I can't say why they break down, but I know God is the one who can bring marriages back together, can restore marriages. And the next one is bereavement. I know it's sad when we lose a loved one, because we found that out, haven't we, with our families. And the hardest one I found in regards to bereavement was Lillian's sister, when she died at 14 with kidney failure. But we got through that, didn't we? Yeah. You know, and when you mourn for somebody, there's a time comes when you start to come out of that mourning, and you remember them. And as you remember them, the more you come out of that mourning, there's a time of mourning, a time of happiness. Yeah. Isn't there? Yeah.
You were like her big brother, weren't you?
Yeah, a sister used to call... She had a big brother, there's a sister, but a sister used to call me a big brother. Because if Lillian got off my knee, she'd sit on it. Wouldn't she? Then the last one, I think, families. A lot of families split up. Why they split up, I have no idea. But they do split up, but I do know that God is the one that can bring families back together. He's the healer. He's the healer of everything. Isn't he? So that's all I've got to share. You know, like I said, I'm not as long as Lillian.